Okay, continuing on. Grace without compulsion. There is a positive element of death and resurrection of Christ that is not related to sin, but is creative. As Jesus said in John 12, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. John 12:24. This represents the positive intention behind death and resurrection, which is not related to sin, but is creative, meant to produce a harvest. The tree of life is an aspect of salvation, the intrinsic essence of what salvation is. It is fully positive apart from sin. Amen. There is no mention of sin with the tree of life and no instructions to partake of it. I am unsure what this would have looked like if we had not sinned. However, we can see a type of this in the creation of Eve. God put Adam into a deep sleep, representing death, took a rib from his side, and built the woman. This process is seen as a type of the church, with Christ at its center. There is a positive element of death and resurrection in this that is not related to sin, but is creative. As Jesus said in John 12, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it abides alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. This represents the positive intention behind death and resurrection, which is not related to sin, but is creative, meant to produce a harvest. The tree of life is an aspect of salvation, the intrinsic essence of what salvation is. It is fully positive apart from sin. There is no mention of sin with the tree of life and no instructions to partake of it. I think I may have read that twice, but that's okay. Because it's important to know, to realize that. So, you get it double. There's no command that says you must take the tree of life. It is represented as available, and it is hoped that you would desire it. That's what salvation is. You definitely need it, and if you don't have it, you only face judgment and will not be able to maintain anything. But it's offered freely, with no price, producing no debt. Amen. That's grace. The tree of life produces no debt, but it's there, and man should have taken it. They needed to recognize its value, but Satan deceived them, leading them to believe that the tree of knowledge was more desirable. Knowledge was highly valued, so much so that they mistook the tree of knowledge for the tree of life. By the time Satan was done manipulating them, they believed they would live forever. The tree of life, however, represents God's life as nourishment for man. Between the tree of knowledge and the tree of life, we can also observe a difference between general knowledge and the wisdom that comes from God. Amen. Looking back, we know that the tree of life was essential. However, it likely did not have the attractive appearance that the tree of knowledge possessed. Genesis 3 described the tree of knowledge as pleasing to behold and desirable. But what would have drawn Adam and Eve to the tree of life with the commands or warnings related to it? Perhaps it lacked the appealing features that the tree of knowledge had. Similarly, Christ has no form or comeliness that we should desire him with our baser senses. Okay, to be drawn to him requires wisdom and entrance of light from God, spiritual understanding, and revelation. As we see in Genesis 4, Abel was the next person to exhibit this kind of wisdom. As a prophet, He became a shepherd and offered the firstling of the flock and the fat portion to God without any outward command or instruction or warning. He had wisdom. In contrast, Cain only had knowledge. He knew what God had said about toiling in the cursed ground to bring forth bread from the sweat of his brow, but he had no wisdom to understand that this was not something God desired. Instead, he tried to offer God the results of the fall and the curse. Through grace, God gives freely without compelling us and desires that we would come to Him with an understanding of what He wants and who He is. Amen. He desires friends, not slaves. Jesus said, "Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knows not what his Lord does. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known unto you." John 15:15. Amen.